evening and welcome to this virtual author event from Majors and Quinn Booksellers. My name is Annie and I'm the events coordinator at Majors and Quinn, which, if you don't know, is an independent bookstore in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tonight, we're pleased to be hearing from Anders Morley about his book, This Land of Snow. After hearing a bit from and about the book, Anders would love to answer questions if you have any. To ask a question, leave us a chat or comment in the video, whether you're watching on YouTube or the Majors and Quinn Facebook page. You can do this at any point during the event, and I'll be back to help take questions at the end. This video will also remain available on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, so please tell your friends who couldn't tune in live they can check it out at their convenience. I'd like to remind you that, of course, the book, This Land of Snow, is available for sale at majorsandquinn.com. I will drop a direct link to that book in the comments, but you can also head directly to www.majorsandquinn.com and use author or title search to find This Land of Snow. Thank you for supporting an independent bookstore if you do that. Finally, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. A dual citizen of the US and Canada, Anders Morley grew up in New Hampshire and began skiing at age 5. After earning a master's degree from University of St. Andrews in Scotland, he settled in Italy where he worked as a translator and an English teacher and explored the Alps in his free time. He contributes regularly to New Hampshire Magazine, and his work has appeared in a variety of other publications, including the Globe and Mail, Northern Woodlands Magazine, Maisonneuve Magazine, and the Aurorian. Morley lives in northern New Hampshire, although he is currently joining us from Italy, and it is the middle of the night. So thank you, Anders, for being here, like literally in the dead of night, pitching your book and telling us about this beautiful book that is so perfect for our current season here in North America, and especially for us based here in Minnesota. So thanks very much. I can't wait to hear more about the book, and I will be back for questions later.
Great, thank you, Andy, and thank you to Majors and Quinn for hosting this event and giving me an opportunity to talk about my book. And of course, thanks to all of you who are in the audience, watching wherever you are, hopefully in many time zones scattered around the world. As Andy mentioned, I'm in Italy, where it's 2 o'clock in the morning, but that's the way things go in the age of the coronavirus, I suppose. So. As Annie said, I'm here to talk about my book, This Land of Snow, A Journey Across the North in Winter. Very basically, the book tells the story of an entire winter spent traveling across northwestern Canada on skis. So what I'd like to do this evening is first to give you a little bit of an introduction to the book, sort of an overall picture of what it's about and kind of the trajectory of the story, hopefully without spoiling it. And then I want to do a first reading in which I want to help you to imagine what it's like to be completely immersed in winter. And then I want to take a break and look at a few pictures, and then I want to come back at the end to another reading that explores another facet of winter. And then we'll open it up for questions at the end. So, what prompted me to set out on skis across the most hostile season? It's not something that many people who were in my life every day at the time could understand. I was living in Italy at the time when I decided I was going to set out on this journey, and I had been in Europe for the better part of 10 years. I was married to an Italian woman, and basically I became fairly acutely homesick. And I think initially the idea of setting out on this journey was a way of sort of addressing that homesickness or that nostalgia. I had always wanted to go on some kind of a long journey on foot, or at least under my own power. And I'd been skiing since I was 5 years old, downhill skiing since I was 5 years old, and I started skiing cross country when I was about 10. Never competitively anything like that. I just liked to explore the woods on my skis. It was kind of like how I went for walks in the wintertime. But anyway, living in Italy, a crowded place, a kind of a noisy place. I was living in the city, a place that doesn't have much of a winter unless you live in the mountains. It's sort of I felt that these particular facets of my former life were missing, and so somehow they all came together into this idea of going for a really long journey on skis through a sparsely populated and cold, obviously cold place. So that's the backdrop of the story. Initially, I was going to try to travel across the entire continent from one side of Canada to the other. The shape that my journey took ended up being a bit different, and I think at this point I'm going to put up a map just for a couple of minutes while I talk you through this. So I don't know if you can see this.
You're good. We can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So like I said, I initially thought I would try to ski all the way across Canada. It became apparent rather quickly, but only after I hit the ground and started skiing that wasn't going to be possible, at least not at the speed I was traveling at and in the way that I wanted to experience the journey, you know, sort of seeing things along the way, meeting people, enjoying myself. And so this is the way the journey actually unfolded. So I started in the west in Prince Rupert, which is the northernmost Pacific port in Canada, just below the Alaska border, as you can see. And I basically traveled east following the 55th parallel. I wanted to be in this belt of boreal forest, sometimes called the snow forest, precisely because snowfall is heavy there. You can see that there are lots of little towns along the way, but there were, you know, these are little towns, and there are long distances between them. And some of the country I traveled through was extremely remote. But it wasn't like, you know, making a journey in the Arctic or in a polar region. I never went more than 7 or 8 days without seeing another person. And usually it was less than that. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to see people. So getting back to the map, you could see that I traveled eastward. First, I crossed the coast mountains. That was the physically the most challenging part. And then there was a bit of lowland, and then I crossed the Rockies, the northern Rockies, skied into Alberta, and then Saskatchewan really is sort of paradise for a cross-country skier. Very sparsely populated, lots of woods, rolling hills in the north, frozen lakes to ski on that are all sort of chained together by these little portage trails. And then down into Manitoba, where I dipped southeast and ended up in an area called the Porcupine Hills, which was nice to ski in. So we can go back to the normal screen now. Annie, please. And I will get out of there.
Done.
Great. Thank you. So that's the journey I made. But the book is much more than just a narration of the journey. So it's a narration of, and it's chronologically told, basically linear, moving across the land. And you know, I talk about my experiences. I talk a bit about natural history and cultural history as it's relevant along the way. And there are lots of meetings with people, and I think that's the warmest part of the book, and that's an important. The fact that they were warm meetings is important in terms of what I learned from the experience, because I think that setting off, I didn't appreciate how important human relationships were, and it's one of the things the journey taught me. But then there are other planes to the book. So there are a couple of themes that I wanted to deal with. One of them was winter ecology, and so there's quite a bit of that in the book. And Another was I wanted to take a look at the ways that we move across landscapes. And this is something that's written a lot about in the last 10 or 15 years. But I wanted to look particularly at the winter landscape, and skiing seemed to me like an instance of a way that human beings have adapted to live fairly harmoniously with winter. And so I thought that was another interesting fact to explore. And there are a few others. And then, of course, I mentioned at the beginning that I was married when I set off on this journey, and I walked away from my marriage to go on this journey. And so the book also deals with the fallout of that decision, but I won't say much about that because I don't want to spoil the story. So at this point, I want to do my first reading. In the book, there are a couple of essays embedded, so that sort of the linear narration breaks, and there are these little essays that touch on a couple of the themes that were most important to me. In this one is from a chapter called Winter. I'm just going to read the first few paragraphs, and it's a sort of setting of the scene. I actually wrote this chapter in the summertime, and I was in Italy in the summer, and it was very hot. And so I was trying to get back into the feeling of being on this journey out there in the winter when it was very cold. Like northern towns whose very existence I sometimes doubt, winter is hard to imagine in summertime. When birds peep and the air pulses with cicada song and plump leaves flutter on the breeze, it takes no special awareness to see that the earth is alive and even to recognize benevolence in it. The thought of ice only brings refreshment. It's an accent on the day, like a dash of pepper on your picnic lunch. The ice cubes in the cooler are delicate things to be carefully kept from melting. It takes intense mental effort to turn the world on which your very sense of being depends inside out, so that those glistening little cubes that under the sun look almost like jewels become the dominant element, invading everything else, silencing the music of summer, and freezing the trees into leafless submission. Your own being will be profoundly anxious until you find some way of making heat, which your vigilance will then turn to guarding jealously. The friendly summer world has now become impossibly distant. The purpose of winter is to reveal weaknesses in living things. Such weaknesses are identified by restriction of the solar energy that is fed into an ecosystem, which puts everything in it under stress. Diminished sunlight and the resulting cold are the generic stressors, but more specific phenomena test individual members of an ecosystem. Starvation, heavy snow loads, blowing ice particles, dehydration, and ice formation that can kill in several ways. Once weaknesses are identified, inefficiencies can be purged and excess pared away in a process of consolidating the gains of the preceding summer, so that the seasons can be seen as working together to maintain strength. Living beings that can't make do with the restricted energy input are killed without fanfare. When on clear, cold days you are skiing across a vast expanse of white emptiness, and the air seems perfectly still, and you almost imagine there is nothing alive on earth except for you, you can sometimes hear wind currents tangling in the upper air. They moan or make soft howling noises, and in so desolate a place, they seem to cry out to have meanings attached to them. But these writhing drafts have no meaning. The rest that one poet finds in silently falling snow is, for another, winter muffling its victim's screams with a pillow. Sorry, that goes kind of dark there at the end, but when you're out there traveling alone, and sometimes it feels like the whole world is trying to kill you, sometimes your mind goes in dark directions. And that little piece there is kind of melancholy, but it's not. The beginning is the darkest part, and it gets a bit brighter after that. So what I'd like to do now, just to break things up, to mix things up, is to take to switch over to look at a few pictures and we'll spend a few minutes with those, and then we'll come back and I'll do another reading. So Annie, if we can.
You're up.
Okay. So let me jump up to full screen. Okay, so this, of course, is the picture of the book. I should say that this photograph and a couple of others in here were taken by a guy called Dave Price, who may or may not be here this evening, and he's in Flin Flon, Manitoba, and that's where this picture was taken. Okay, so as you know, I started the journey in Prince Rupert, which is on the Pacific coast, but it's a place that, in terms of directness, is almost easier to get to by boat than by car. And so what I did is I took a ferry up from Vancouver Island. I went to Vancouver, went across to Vancouver Island, traveled up the length of Vancouver Island, which takes about a day, and then took a 22-hour ferry passage up the inside passage to Prince Rupert. And here I am on the deck of the ferry on the morning of the day we arrived in Prince Rupert, feeling very excited and jittery at the same time. You can see, for those of you who are skiers, that I'm wearing my leather. These are crispy ski boots with the duckbill that fits into a 3-pin binding. And I picked them because I like skiing in them, but also because they're quite handy to walk in. So I didn't need separate walking shoes, because I expected in a journey of this length to be doing some walking as well. Here I am shortly after I started skiing. So Prince Rupert is in oceanic climate, and there's not a lot of snow there. And so I had to travel about 100 miles inland before I really got into winter. It was November the 19th when I started walking, and I started skiing a few days after that. And the first part was physically the most challenging part, and not only because I was out of shape, but also because I had to cross the coast mountains. And so I had to ski up to a pass called Telkwa Pass, which took 3 or 4 days to reach. And this is probably the second day out. You can see that I'm not dressed very warmly, but here it was still pretty mild during the day. And this picture was taken with a timer, which is another indication of the fact that it's not that cold, because when it got really cold, a battery would not have lasted long enough for me to take pictures with a timer. This picture is here for the skiers in the audience. What I'm doing here is showing you the bottom of my ski. Obviously, this is another picture from Dave Price. I had these. So skiers, backcountry skiers and cross-country skiers use what are called climbing skins, which are these pieces of fabric that adhere to the base of skis. And because of the way the nap lies on this piece of fabric, the skis slide forward. But then if there's a slope that would make them normally slide backward, the nap grips in the snow, and so they don't slide backward. And so it's a way of skiing uphill. But if you have a full-length skin, it's very hard to glide at all. And so what the half-length skin enables you to do is to get more grip than just grip wax would give you, but to have some glide left. So these are perfect for hauling loads, for example, which, as you can see, that's how I carried my gear. So depending on how things stood with my food budget, I had usually between about 100 and 120 pounds behind me. So this is back to British Columbia now, and this is climbing up to that first pass, Telkwa Pass. It's not a great photo, but I like how you can see the sun coming through the clouds in the distance to the west. And this is how several days were spent just skiing up. It was like skiing up steps up this path that followed the stream bed lined with alders until I eventually came to the pass. But as I got into the higher reaches of this little range called the Howson Range, which is part of the Kitimat, ranges in northern British Columbia. There were some pretty serious peaks and some. The trail led up quite high across these talus slopes, and I was a bit worried about the stability of the slopes and, of course, the danger of avalanches. And as these thoughts were going through my head, suddenly the side of a mountain in front of me exploded into the sky, and this crack reached my ears. It took me a minute to dig out my camera and put the batteries in it, because I always kept them outside to keep them warm. I kept them outside the camera. So, you know, a minute or two later, this is what it looks like. So the significant amount of snow has fallen off the side of that mountain, and you can see the powder settling back to earth. And the trail then went ahead over that. But it was better than going back across slopes that hadn't slid. Here I am in the town of Chetwynd, British Columbia, and to get across town, I had crossed the rail yard. At this point, there was a section in northeastern British Columbia where I skied along the railroad for several days, which isn't as depressing as it sounds, because these are railroads that don't see much traffic. Usually a train goes by once a day. In this section, actually, the trains that went by always went by in the middle of the night. So it was like having your own private ski trail, because often the tracks are covered in snow completely, and they have to be graded out. And so this was I found to be the most efficient way of moving across that part of the landscape. This picture I've just included, I like this picture. In my mind, it's just a typical northern scene. You've got sort of these lopsided telephone poles, low winter sun, pink twilight, moon rising. So if this doesn't appeal to you, then I wouldn't recommend skiing across the near north of Canada, because this is what a lot of places look like. This picture I've included just because of I like the smile on my face, and because I know that I've just come through one of the scariest moments in the book, and I won't spoil it for you, but I've just come through a really nasty blizzard and felt utterly lost in the middle of a fairly large lake. And you know, during my sort of a moment of panic, I managed to snap a ski pole in two. Not because I was angry with the ski pole, but it just happened. And so that's why I'm carrying this birch sapling in my left hand that was a temporary stand-in for the ski pole. This picture was taken by a guy in the town of La Ronge, Saskatchewan, called Dave Fast. This is not a great picture, but I include it because it shows an interesting winter phenomenon that a lot of people probably haven't seen. So beyond my ski poles, you see what looks like a snowbank, and that line of raised ice covered in snow actually extends for miles, in this case, probably 10 miles or more. This is on Lac La Ronge, and what you see there is called a pressure ridge, and it's where two plates of ice collide and send ice up and also down underwater. This isn't a particularly elevated one. I saw pressure ridges probably as high as 10 feet. They can get much higher than that in polar seas and places like that. They can be dangerous as well, because sometimes there's open water where the two leads come together, and so you have to be a bit cautious when you're crossing them. This is also on Lac La Ronge, and I like this picture just because it gives you a sense of the scale of some of these lakes. I traveled on a lot of lakes, but three that were quite large by any normal standard. This is where I crossed this lake, Lac La Ronge. It was about 22 miles from one side to the other. So what you see, that strip of land that you see here in the distance is not the mainland, but an island. And then this picture is, I think, just taken in the same moment, looking slightly. So let's say the last one was looking sort of northwest. This one's looking more west. And so that's my line that I've just traveled coming in from the right side of the picture. But this is here to show you my tent platform, which I had to prepare every night before bedding down. And here there's a nice wind pack, so it wasn't much work. But sometimes when the snow is really loose and collapsible and 3 feet deep, it could take me the better part of an hour just to set up my tent. Here, this is just a well-shot photograph, so I've included it. Some people think I'm skiing along the New Jersey Turnpike or something with the smokestack in the background, but that is not the case. I'm actually in northern Manitoba, in Flin Flon, and Flin Flon, as some of the Canadians in the audience probably know, is a major mining center for base minerals, and there was a smelter that polluted the atmosphere there for years, and it's actually stopped working in 2010. But anyway, it's kind of an emblem of Flin Flon. It's this thing that you see that you see everywhere. And so I'm skiing south out of Flin Flon onto the Canadian Shield, this land of lakes and granite outcrops, which is also great for skiing across. I couldn't not have a picture of my camp, so this is what it looked like every night, though usually it was in trees rather than on the edge of a lake, but sometimes it was on the edge or in the middle of a lake. And finally, this is me on the eve of the last day, and I'm showing off my skis. My skis were made by Osnes, which is some of you may know, is a relatively small Norwegian company that makes expedition touring skis. And my skis had a picture of Roald Amundsen, the great Norwegian polar explorer, on them. And so he looked at me all day and gave me his own kind of stern encouragement. And that is it for pictures. So if you could switch me back to the normal screen, please, Annie. I'm going to do... Okay. Looks like I'm there. Okay. So in the last reading, I tried to give you a sense of what it feels like to be immersed in winter all the time, or some of the time. I mean, what it feels like some of the time to be immersed in winter all the time. And like I said, one of the themes that runs through the book is our relationship to winter, and there's kind of an environmentalist streak in the book. It's not overbearing, but it is there. And so I try to consider skiing as one way of responding to the winter environment for people that live in northern climates. I could get a bit cranky if I went on about that, so I won't. I'll just let the words I've written and that have been edited speak. So here I'm in the town of Fort St. James, which is in north central British Columbia, and I've just come out of a very remote area north and east of Babine Lake. Come down into the town of Fort St. James, and I met a couple there just when I was out wandering during the day, called Paul and Kelly, who invited me to the local pub for a drink because they were interested in my story. And so Kelly and I have a chat, and then we're waiting for Paul to show up, who was the person I'd met originally. And Paul comes in, and that's where the reading starts. Paul, who appeared in minutes, had grown up in the Netherlands, reading books about explorers Alexander Mackenzie and David Thompson, the Hudson's Bay and Northwest Companies, and the lives of the trappers and voyageurs, the tough French-Canadian woodsmen responsible for transporting furs thousands of miles from the interior to Montreal by canoe. He emigrated at 19 and had long since ceased to regard any place other than Canada as home. Employed as a government forester, he spent his free time plying Stewart Lake in small, unmotorized boats, riding his bicycle, and cross-country skiing. He returned to the Netherlands periodically to see his mother and always came back with the latest innovations in cycling. He sometimes thinks Fort St. James is too crowded now and dreams of going north to one of the remoter lakes. In the pub, we talked about skiing. Paul was forever trying to promote it by setting tracks on the lake and throughout town, but no one used them. The wellness-minded Northern European in him couldn't understand why people wouldn't ski in such an ideal setting. With its rolling terrain and evergreens, Fort St. James looked like Norway, where everyone skis, even old ladies in long skirts toting shopping bags. The land cried out to be skied on. I told Paul I took a practical view of the matter and have never seen myself as an athlete, that I felt skiing was the most sensible way to move on foot in moderate depths of snow and the most elegant. We dreamt out loud of snowbelt towns with winter infrastructure based on this idea, towns with unplowed roads where cars were garaged from December to March, and you moved about on skis, snowshoes, or snowmobiles. Imagine the fuel these towns would save. Fort St. James, Paul told me, was one of only a few municipalities in British Columbia where snowmobiles were permitted to drive in town. Before we parted, Paul and Kelly insisted that I have Christmas dinner with them. When we stepped outside, I was pleased to see that Paul had come on his snowmobile. "I'll show you the fastest way to the lake," he said. He straddled the smoking machine, and before I had my skis on, had sliced through a snowbank at the back of the pub and was sailing downhill through a meadow, leaving a mist of snow for a wake. I kicked as hard as I could and held his taillights in view. Every so often he looked back for my headlamp, which I'd put on for just this reason. We ran along a winding trail into the woods, crossed a snow-covered road, and finally lurched down a long dip onto the lake. Paul slowed only enough to bid a clipped winter goodnight and sped northwest along the unlit shores of Stewart Lake. I killed my light and turned southeast to diligently follow the tracks set to town. Okay, so there you are. I think we'll stop at this point, and I will take some of your questions if you have any.
Yeah, it looks like we have some questions. Thank you for everyone who's watching. I love that we've got people watching from Maine and Minnesota and Colorado, all over the place. If you're watching from Canada, chime in. So we have a question here from Eric. He says, aside from the pole and needing to replace a sled, were there any other mechanical failures that were notably inconvenient?
Again, the pole was certainly the most drastic, just because, mostly because of the moment when it happened. It was just really inconvenient at the time. I had a problem with the sled. I bought 2 sleds before setting off because I expected to have problems. I expected to ruin a sled on the way, and that did happen. So the sled became sort of lacerated longitudinally along the bottom, and it started filling up with snow over the course of days, and so it would sort of get heavier and heavier as the days went on. And so I had a replacement that my brother was actually holding on to for me, and so he mailed it to where he expected me to be. So that was one thing. And then my ski twice blew out an edge. Those skis have metal edges. So I blew an edge out near Flin Flon, and I epoxied it. I went back to the town of Flin Flon and epoxied the edge into place. And then it came out a second time on the second to last day of the expedition. Those are the only things I can think of, mechanical problems.
Well, it's all very dramatic. Where I'm sitting. So here's a question from David. I'm wondering how your physical injuries from the trip are healing. Spoilers.
So yeah, this is obviously someone who's read the book
Yes.
or knows me. Um, so I heard during the first part of the journey, I mentioned that I had to walk from Prince Rupert to Terrace because there wasn't snow. And so what I did was I freighted most of my stuff forward with the Greyhound bus
Mm,
and carried what I thought I might need in the meantime on my back in a backpack. And it was mostly walking. It was walking along the Skeena River, and really the only way to walk along the Skeena River is along the road. And so I had an absurdly heavy backpack, probably pushing 90 pounds. And I was walking in these duckbill ski boots, which weren't really meant for walking. And so
mm,
by the end of the third day, my knee was the size of a softball. And I was in this really stiff limp. And so when I got to Terrace, I started skiing almost immediately. But then after 2 days, I had to backtrack because the knee was not doing any better. And then I ended up staying in Terrace for, I think it was 9 days before I started skiing again, and finally got on my way. So it gave me a bit of trouble for the first couple of weeks. Like I would have, after particularly hard days, it would get really, this sort of sharp pain would shoot up it. Now, the knee, interestingly, if I sit still for very long, like if I don't go for a walk every day, that the same knee will become sore. But that's about it. So it's one of those things you have to use. And
mhm.
it, who knows? Maybe when I'm old, I'll have arthritis or something.
Well, that leads me to one of my questions, which was obviously you're an experienced skier. As you said, you've been skiing for your whole life. Um, but you mentioned downhill specifically, not so much maybe the cross country. But how much, if any, like training and what sort of training preparation maybe did you have to do between when you decided you were doing this and like when you actually went and
Yeah.
started?
Well, the tricky thing about a winter-long expedition is that there's no winter preceding it, and so it's kind of hard to train for
Right.
winter when there's no winter. And you can go to the mountains and whatnot. So I was in Italy at the time, and I do live close to the Alps, so I did, and I still do part time. But so in the winter beforehand, I did quite a bit of backcountry skiing, but not like a strict training regimen. One thing that I did do was I don't think this was really necessary, but I was kind of worried that that my cold tolerance had diminished after years of living in Italy. And so I
Mm-hmm.
would into the Alps with my summer sleeping bag and sleep in it in the winter time, and to kind of shiver through the night and trained myself to sleep in a state of shivering, which was unpleasant. Um, Other than that, not physically, nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, I'm a pretty physically active person. I don't think most people who aren't would go on this kind of a journey.
Right.
But I did tons of reading, of course, and studying maps to plan, all the logistic parts of the journey, and getting together gear and planning my food and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that was what most of the preparation was.
Yeah. So there was lots of prep. Don't
Yes,
just
there was.
randomly do this, people. Um, so we have a question from Stephanie, who also responded to my call. She is tuning in from Alberta, Canada. Yay. Thank you, Stephanie. Um, what would you like? What would you tell young people that would encourage them to try cross-country skiing?
Good question. Uh, well, I mean, I liked cross country skiing when I was a young person. I think because I liked being out in the woods, um, being out in the outdoors and enjoying nature. And cross country skiing was just the way to get out there and enjoy the outdoors in the winter time, rather than limiting yourself to the summertime. What else would I tell a young person? I don't know. I don't think I was a normal young person, so it's hard for me to say.
Well, like, what if a young person is like, cross country is boring. I'm only interested in mountain shooting down the hill. Like,
Uh,
what would you say to that?
well, first of all, I don't think any kind of cross-country skiing is boring. But a person who would say, a young person who would say it would probably think the kind of cross-country skiing I was doing is boring. But cross skiing in a Nordic center is far from boring. I mean, especially skate skiers, they go really fast, and it's technically much more demanding than downhill skiing. And so that gives you something to sort of aspire towards, a skill to cultivate. Maybe that doesn't interest young people. I don't know. But the point is, there's adrenaline in cross country skiing as well as downhill skiing.
Cool. Also, a question from Stephanie: what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, I'm not a professional adventurer, so I don't know. I make my living writing. What's next for me? I'd like to do. I've got a few ideas of journeys to write about. One of them, I may as well say, one of them is I'd like to do to go on a long walk that's done entirely between the hours of sunset and sunrise. So I guess I'm drawn to the times when no one else is out. When no one else is out. No, but that would I'm interested in protecting night skies, and I like night. So that's another idea, but it wouldn't be anything extreme like this. It would be a much shorter, like a month or something like that, and it wouldn't be in the winter, of course.
Right. Well, that's related then. You say you're a writer, not an adventurer, although those can be combined. So can you tell us a little bit about the journey towards making this book? Like, did you pitch it before you had done the trip, or was this just something you worked on and then found a home for publishing wise after?
I knew that I wanted to write a book about the journey. I don't remember what book I envisaged before the journey, but certainly it would have been very different from what it actually became. So, but I didn't write it until afterwards, and I didn't pitch it to anyone until I had some kind of a manuscript.
Sure.
So I wrote a first draft of the. Well, I made this journey in the winter of 2012 and 13. In the following winter, I cranked out in the course of a few months a first draft, which, in its basic form, was pretty similar to what's there now. But there were a lot of things that needed elaborating and fine tuning. So I put it aside for a few years, and then I pitched it to Mountaineers Books, who published it in 2016 or so, 17 maybe. And then it took a while to get it off the ground, but I think 2018 was when I started working on it in earnest again.
Yeah. So a long process for sure. Here's another question from Eric. Of the people you met on your journey, do you still stay in touch with any?
I do. I'd say about 5 or 6 of them, like in fairly, reasonably good touch. And then there are a few others that I've heard from now and then. A couple who have remained quite close friends, I would say. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, did you reach out to let them know, hey, a book, you're in my book?
Of course, yeah, of course. Some of the, for example, the guy I mentioned, I don't know, this Dave Price, who took some of those pictures, may be here tonight. I don't know.
Let us know. Okay, well, I'll give people a chance to type a final question while I will ask a question I've been ending a lot of our virtual events with, which is, obviously this has been a year of virtual events and staying home, and a lot of people have been choosing to spend that time reading, which is great. So what have you read in the past year that you would like to recommend to everyone watching?
Wow, That's the past year. I think I'll do one that I mentioned a book that it was probably slightly over a year ago that I read it, but I think I can still count. So there's I you know, like lots of people who are Nordic skiers think if I have Norway on the brain a lot for whatever reason, because it's kind of the mecca of Nordic skiing. And so I you know, allude to Norway a few times in my book. And I'm interested in deep ecology, which is kind of Norwegian eco-philosophy. But anyway, so there's a Norwegian writer called Erling Kage who has written a few books, but last year or the year before, in 2019, I think he came out with a book called Walking. I think its subtitle is one step at a time or something like that.
Okay.
It's a short book written in a very simple style, but extremely lyrical, meditative. And I think that Erling Kage, incidentally, well, he's kind of a polymath, but he is also one of the most accomplished polar explorers ever to. He's in his 50s now, so he doesn't really do much of that sort of thing, but he's also a good writer. And his book about, I think what I wanted to say is I think he would understand walking in the same kind of broad sense that I do. So for him, I think skiing would just be kind of a species of walking, like the winter version of walking. So I think the book encompasses, you know, what happens in your mind when you're cross-country skiing as well. Anyway, it's a great book.
Yeah, great recommendation. I think he also wrote a book about silence. I think he has a book called Silence. So yeah, if you're interested in the type of stuff that's in Anders's book, you know, kind of nature and walking and just sort of, you know, how we move through the world, this guy, Erling Kage, his stuff is great too, which you can also find at majorsandquinn.com. Use the author search. And yeah, looks like we got through all of our questions here. So, and we have some thank yous, and I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and giving us their great comments and letting us know where they're watching from. I'll remind you one more time that the website is www.majorsandquinn.com, and I did just put a direct link to This Land of Snow. If you just click that or copy and paste that, it'll take you straight to it on our website. Also, if you happen to be watching from Minnesota, which I know at least one of you is, Majors and Quinn is open for in-store browsing. Of course, it is limited capacity and you must wear a mask, but we would be happy to see you. The book is on the shelves in the store. So if you want to get out of the house and say hello to some booksellers who love talking to customers, masked face, please do so. We're open 10 to 7 daily. So thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Anders, for staying up so late, or maybe getting up early, depending on what you did.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you to Majors and Quinn booksellers. And yes, you know, if you're interested in the book, order it from them. And thank you all for coming.
Yeah, wonderful. Have a great evening, everyone, and
great evening.
We will see you next time. All the best.